trustees of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, the Mandela Rhodes Foundation, the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, as well as their respective CEOs, Aus Judy Sikuza and Ms. Bongile Mkabela, members of the board of the Atlantic Fellows for Racial Equity, members of parliament, government and diplomatic corps, and all distinguished guests, and of course, most importantly, our scholars, our learners, our children here present. I want to also thank and recognize Ntate Dennis Goldberg. Ntate Goldberg spent 23 years in prison, and he was fighting for the freedom of our country. Let's give him a huge round of applause. So as we are about to start, I'd like us to please stand to attention and then bring out Austandiswa Mazwai and the Fezeka High School Choir, who will then deliver the national anthem. May we please stand? I want us to also thank the choir. As we thank the choir, thank you so much. We know that you'll be back again to make sure that you serenade us with some beauties later on. Please help me welcome your host for the day, Aus Judy Sikuza, who is the CEO of the Mandela Rhodes Foundation.
Good afternoon, President Cyril Ramaphosa, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, Mrs. Graça Machel, Nkosi Zwelithini Mandela, and the other Mandela members present. Welcome to the trustees of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Mandela Rhodes Foundation, and the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, as well as CEOs Sal Hatang and Ms. Sibongile Mkhabela. Distinguished guests, fellow human beings, we welcome you. Today we are gathered to mark the 30th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's return to the people under the broad theme, From Freedom to Liberation. Living in the old Transkei at the time, I myself was a mere 4-year-old when Madiba took those historic steps outside to meet us as his people. I remember that my parents felt quite jubilant because Madiba's release symbolized the possibility for the people. We now gather here on this very balcony where Madiba in 1990 began to think about his own liberation, but he knew that he and the people of South Africa were not yet free. Dr. Mandela invited all people of all races to participate in the true liberation of South Africa. He committed himself and the nation to the project of nation building and transformation. Significant strides have been made in South Africa, and this progress must be seen and appreciated in order to motivate us to continue to move forward. But of course, we know that 30 years into Madiba's release, things have not fundamentally shifted for many people in South Africa. And so the call for us right now is to take the courageous step. We need to act urgently in making the fundamental systemic shifts required towards true equality and liberation. If we do not act urgently, we will continue to be prisoners of greed, of fear, of each other, and a continued normalization of the social ills that keep us imprisoned and further away from our common humanity. Mr. Mandela really believed that we could achieve a democratic and free society in which all people live together in harmony and with equal rights. I believe that this vision is still possible and that we are on the journey towards it, no matter how hard it may seem. 30 years ago, Mr. Mandela stood here in his first address after returning to the people. 30 years later, may we, the people, return to the vision and spirit of Nelson Mandela. For all of us as South Africans to have the consciousness, understanding, and courage to commit to making our democracy one in which all people can thrive. It is now my distinguished honor to invite up the Mayor of Cape Town, Mr. Dan Plato, who will make some opening remarks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Mr. President, Honorable Mr. Motlanthe, Honorable National Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, and all our other honored guests with us this afternoon. Also, good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen out there, and all the other councillors and other ministers. Welcome to this very special occasion. The 11th of February marks a day in our country's history where hope became reality. And we are all here at the iconic City Hall, a place where the late first democratic President Nelson Mandela made his first address to the public as a free man. And our honored president of today, Cyril Ramaphosa, was present and part of those proceedings. It is a site which has become a heritage and popular tourist location, immortalized by the statue of his likeness, where scores of locals and visitors take photos to mark having visited this significant space. And the City Hall did become, indeed, a significant space. It is a site where a museum will soon be opening in remembrance of Tata Madiba, and we're looking forward to that. Cape Town also pays its respect to our former leader through a massive image displayed on the outer walls of the Civic Centre as a watchful guardian over the city. A welcoming image of a smiling Madiba greeting those entering the city, and for which a process is underway to renew his image so that it may continue to honor his memory. The 11th of February is a day on which all of us should pause and reflect on the hope held for a new democratic South Africa, the hope where a country could one day begin to heal the wounds of its divided past. The hope that every South African could prosper because of opportunity and success. One person represented that hope and the sacrifices to bring our country to democracy. It was indeed a difficult journey, characterized by pain and personal loss. Nelson Mandela, our first democratic president, and the many other struggle veterans. And many of those other struggle veterans are with us today. They're sitting there in the tent and maybe even here in the crowd, endured that journey for millions of people. So all of us would be able to access opportunity and have equal rights. It is a project that continues because there is still work to be done. Madiba endured circumstances that would have made most men bitter and vengeful. However, ladies and gentlemen, after all that I've said, after 27 years in jail, his strength of spirit remained unwavering, as strong as the first day he joined the struggle for liberation. Madiba's humble and warm nature was one of a true leader and a true diplomat, but also of a true citizen. He remains an example for all of us to unite, like we unite the other day with the Springboks winning that World Cup. That is how we need to continue to unite and to say to one another, we are all just people and we are all just South Africans. Throughout all, Madiba survived. He believed in his vision for the country. And in conclusion, that is my last word to all of you today. Let us all live up to that Madiba vision. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would now like to invite up to the podium former President of South Africa, Kgalema Motlanthe, who was in office between September 2008 and May 2009. President Motlanthe is also the Deputy President between 2009 and 2014. He is also a trustee of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which is hosting us today. Mr. President, we welcome you on the stage.
Amandla. Your Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, and your dear wife, Dr. Tsepo Motsepe, Honorable Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture, Nathi Mthethwa, Lord Mayor of Cape Town, Your Worship Dan Plato, the Mandela family, and all eminent persons here present. On behalf of the Nelson Mandela Foundation's Board of Trustees, I greet you and express our gratitude for your presence here today. You will agree with me, I'm sure, that beyond the formalities of an event like this and the marking of such a significant moment in history, there is an enormous well of emotion that all peace-loving people in South Africa and the world over will be drawing on today. For when Madiba walked out of prison on that February afternoon 30 years ago, we could see clearly at last, the promised land. We could reach out and believe that we would touch it in our lifetime. For the Nelson Mandela Foundation, reckoning with our past is central to the mandate Madiba gave us as he stepped away from public life. We can only make liberated fortunes for our country by learning from the histories of our ancestors before colonialism touched our shores, by learning from the struggles against colonization, the struggles against apartheid, and the histories of our transition to democracy. So on this day of memorialization, we retrace Madiba's footsteps when he walked out of Victor Verster prison, when he guided us through CODESA negotiations, the 1994 elections, and his presidency, and of course his counsel, vision, and exemplary leadership. He walked out with a mandate from the African National Congress to negotiate the end of apartheid, introduce democracy, transform our society fundamentally, and build a new nation. That mandate was endorsed by the international community and drew its ultimate moral authority from the broadest cross-section of South Africans. What a mandate, what a challenge. Today, we still face many of the stubborn challenges that Madiba contemplated on this hallowed ground 30 years ago, and we now face many socio-economic problems that deserve our closest attention. The need to be guided by the highest moral values is as important now as it ever was. Our duty to cultivate and encourage a mindset of activism in all citizens is a continuous and expanding mandate, actually a call to action for all the people. As we view our country through the lens of history, we can observe the great gains we have achieved with democracy and at the same time recognize those enduring failures that confront us today. Through this lens, we are asked to consider the ethical imperatives, dilemmas, and implied politics of the legacy of apartheid and confess that the dividend of our democracy has not reached the most vulnerable and marginalized people of our country. There is a growing sense of impatience in South Africa that is fueled by doubt and despair, and this leaves many people feeling like they have been left behind and that they do not belong. These deep-seated feelings, in my view, define our reality as we remember Madiba's release from prison. It is a challenge that confronts all South Africans. The underlying question, however, for us all remains, how do we make the future of Madiba's dreams? Today, or this afternoon, we are thankful that we have President Cyril Ramaphosa to address this anniversary. President Ramaphosa, in fact, was present when Madiba made his first public address after 27 years of incarceration, and who today will share with us his reflections of the past and his vision for our country in this sacred space. As I draw to a close, let me add that if the future of Madiba's dreams is to be made, then it will take all of us to take responsibility for the work. We must embrace the power of dialogue because our democracy is, in the last instance, an outcome of Madiba's ongoing dialogue and his strength and conviction to take action. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to walk the talk. It is time to work. And as Madiba told us when he reached 90 years of age and bowed out of public engagements, and I quote, "It is in your hands now," close quote, meaning it is in our hands. And to all those naysayers who continue to cap at Madiba's choices, vision, and actions, I want to leave you with Bishop Trevor Huddleston's words when he said, and I quote, "There were hands stretched out to heal and to comfort men, hands stretched out to clasp other hands in friendship, hands stretched out in blessing and in prayer. But it did not stop men nailing those hands to the wood of the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, for reminding us that indeed for us to see the realization of Madiba's dream, we have to work together as South Africans and to make this democracy real in our lifetime. I would now like to invite up Ms. Thandi Swamazwai and the Fezeka Secondary Choir, where they will be singing a song for us before I invite up our next guest. Ms. Thandi Swamazwai. It's beautiful to see the future sitting at us like this. Jela gamache sobashaya gamache oh inkomo zobuya neneji jela gamache sobashaya gamache oh inkomo zobuya jela gamache sobashaya gamache oh inkomo zobuya jela gamache jela gamache jela
Izwe lethu. I-Afrika mayibuye. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Thandiswa and the choir. We all know that music was something that was very important and special to Madiba, and I think you would have loved to listen and hear these beautiful words in this moment. I'd now like to invite up the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, who I joked with to say I'm very happy that he's preparing the way for me to take on the portfolio in 15 years' time. Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, please can you come up for your remarks and introduce the President?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Program Director. His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, the former President Motlanthe, the Mandela family, Grasa Machel, our sister, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Bowie, the mayor of this beautiful city. Political transitions are complex affairs. They bring about a lot of uncertainty, sometimes confusion and anxiety. And in that situation, you need to have leadership with clarity of thought and nobility of vision. This is what we had when we faced with the transition from apartheid to democracy. And many milestones have been covered since the wars of resistance. But one major milestone, which was the roadmap to 1994, was the conference in Tanzania of the ANC in Morogoro, one of the rural towns there. And in this conference, the ANC came up with the roadmap characterized by 4 pillars. And it said, if we follow these pillars, we are going to attain our freedom. Mass mobilization, underground work, armed resistance, and international solidarity. Somebody was there. Someone was following the instruction of the ANC. And that person is with us here in the implementation of all these pillars. We must say that when de Klerk lifted the ban on political organizations, the movement, the liberation movement have been unbanned. It unbanned itself even before it was banned by unbanned by de Klerk. And when that happened, we should follow footsteps of Madiba to thank the masses of the people that their protracted struggle led us to 1994 breakthrough. And the men who so participated and led the masses, be it in labor movement, be it in the Release Mandela campaign, be it in the national reception campaign of Mandela, is here with us. And this man went further to be given by the very ANC a responsibility to be the first Secretary General of the African National Congress after it was unbanned. And as we know, today, he is the President of the ANC and the President of the Republic of South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to request the President of the Republic to come and address us. Thank you for your attention.
Amandla. Amandla. Izwe lethu. I-Afrika. Maibuye. Sanbonan. Molweni. Dumelang. Abshen. Dimasiari. Goeiemiddag. Good afternoon. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe, Mama Graça Machel, and the entire Mandela family, the Mayor of the City of Cape Town, Your Worship Dan Plato, Minister Nathi Mthethwa, the Minister of Arts and Culture and Sports, Isitwalandwe, Dennis Goldberg, members of the Mandela Reception Committee who are here, distinguished peace activists and Nobel Peace Laureate, Ms. Leima Gobe, ambassadors and members of the diplomatic corps, and my sister Judy, who is the head of the Mandela Rhodes Foundation, Chief Executive of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Ndate Sello Hatang, and all other trustees and ministers and MECs, and distinguished guests, but most importantly, greetings to all of you young people who are here. I say hello to all of you, hello. 30 years ago, we stood here with this very man who is standing next to me. He stood here to speak, and I held a microphone as he spoke for the very first time. It was here when we received Nelson Mandela and celebrated his release from prison. The 11th of February will forever be remembered as one of those most memorable days in the history of the world, not only in the history of South Africa. Everyone who was aware of what was happening in South Africa tries to remember where they were and what they were doing at the moment when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Some were young, but today they too try to remember what it felt like at the time, like one Tsepo Makubela, who now works for government. He wrote to me this morning and said, "Good morning, Mr. President. Today marks the 30th anniversary since the release of Madiba, and I remember seeing you at the forefront of Victor Verster prison, leading the way as Mandela took his first steps from freedom. I remember the day," he says, "like it was yesterday. I was a young boy in Soweto, elated knowing that Madiba's freedom meant freedom for all South Africans," close quotes. It was the day that dramatically changed the course of the history of our country. I cannot think of a single day in the history of our country when an event positively changed the course of the country like the release of Nelson Mandela from prison. It was an emotional moment when Utatu Madiba worked out of Victor Verster prison as a free man after 27 lonely and painful years of imprisonment. He walked out of prison a free man into the hearts and the warm arms of the people of South Africa and was happily received here at this very space where we are at the Marine Parade by the masses of our people here in Cape Town. It was you, the people of the Western Cape and Cape Town, who came out in your thousands as you lined up along the road from Victor Verster to Cape Town to catch a glimpse of this great legendary man who had been hidden in the dungeons of apartheid cells for almost 3 decades. You swelled the streets in front of the City Hall, waving ANC flags, singing and crying with joy, and you were chanting, "The ANC lives, the ANC leads." It was indeed an exhilarating moment. It was a moment when the world literally stood still. People all over the world, they stood still to watch their television screens, and CNN at that time had just really gotten off broadcasting real-time news. They watched as Nelson Mandela with Mama Winnie Mandela walk out of prison, and people all over the world were filled with tears, and it was tears of joy. A day when the whole world focused their eyes on us and our country. There was simply magic in the air. That was the day when we touched the future with our hearts and our hopes. It was a day when we had been yearning for, even as we did not know what the future looked like. All that mattered for all of us was that our freedom had finally arrived. The day Madiba was released was the day we all knew that apartheid was dead and it was finished and clear. The apartheid genie had definitely gone out of the bottle and could not be put back again. And it was you who came from far and wide, men and women, black and white, fathers carrying their children on their shoulders, who were all over here. It was you who gave the most historic welcome to our hero. But it was you, the people of our country, who had ensured that Nelson Mandela was freed from prison. It was through your struggles in the underground. It was through your struggles, through mass mobilization, in your various organizations, your unions, your churches, your sporting bodies, your civic bodies, and many others. It was, yes, through the armed struggle. It was also, yes, through international solidarity, the 4 pillars that Minister Mthethwa spoke about. It was the people of this country who had finally achieved their victory to make sure that indeed Nelson Mandela was released. It was not out of the kindness of F.W. de Klerk's heart. It was not because he felt sorry for Nelson Mandela. It was not because he was a kind-hearted man. It was because of the pressure and the struggles that the people of our country waged to enable Nelson Mandela to be released. It was your victory. It was, yes, on this day, the day when all the people of our country rejoiced and held a massive party. Ons het lekker gepartij hier Hier by hierdie plek. Daar was net baie mense hier. Hulle het lekker gedans, hulle het lekker gesing, hulle het lekker geluister as Nelson Mandela addressed us. I'm pleased to see so many young people in this crowd today, and I want to applaud the Nelson Mandela Foundation for having arranged that so many young people should be here. You are the generation born from democracy. You will have grown up with the story of Utata Madiba, learned about him in school, and even seen him on television. Some of you may even have been lucky enough to have met him. I will tell you that on that day 30 years ago, these steps were also full of young South Africans like you. They were all over here, standing together, shoulder to shoulder with Walter Sisulu, Utata Madiba. They wanted to see where their country was going to be taken to. But unlike you, the young people in the crowd had never ever seen Madiba's face, nor heard his voice. He had been jailed before they were even born, and all they knew of him was his name, whispered by their parents. Throughout those 27 years, when he was a prisoner of a heartless regime, it was the mothers and the fathers of this country who kept his name and memory alive. Winnie Mandela kept Nelson Mandela's name alive every day. She and many others kept the fires of resistance burning in the breasts of the people of this country. We recall the mothers and fathers of Khayelitsha, of Manenberg, of Guguletu, Bonteheuwel, and in so many other towns and villages who ensured that the name Nelson Mandela was never forgotten. You are the people who hid his messages and writings and those of the banned African National Congress in your homes and shared them with others to keep his memory alive. You wore T-shirts with messages printed like "Free Nelson Mandela," risking arrest. You told your children about him and that he was fighting so that one day we could all be free. At a time when the mere mention of his name was enough to get you arrested, you never let up the cry that had been resounding around the world to free Nelson Mandela. You, the people of this great city, kept your promise to him that you would bring him home, and you did bring Nelson Mandela home. And his first place of arrival was here in Cape Town. So thank you, Cape Town, for warmly welcoming Nelson Mandela. So we pay tribute to you as Cape Townians. Above all, we thank you. It is indeed difficult to describe, having been witness to the events of the 11th, the day the gates of Victor Verster prison swung open and President Mandela walked free. I was pleased to hear that a number of members who were part of the reception process went to Victor Verster prison, and a number of them are here. Trevor Manuel, Vali Musa, Bulelani Nguka, Jay Naidu, and a number of others. They are here and they can tell their own stories of how that day unfolded, and how, as we brought Nelson Mandela from Victor Verster, when we had said to the apartheid regime, now that you have released him into the hands of our people. We don't want any of your police or army near him, because we feared that they could harm him when he was amongst our people. So we said, your police must keep away. And so we drove him from Victor Verster coming up here into Cape Town. And along the way, the convoy was so long and so complicated was the traffic that along the way we lost Nelson Mandela's car. We did not know where his car was for a few hours. I was with Vali Musa, Trevor Manuel, and we panicked and thought that the people of our country will never forgive us for having lost Nelson Mandela. But he emerged, and we were really pleased. So this was a moment that brings a lot of words into one's mind. Exhilaration, excitement, anticipation, fear, relief, joy. Perhaps all of these were rolled into one. But nothing could describe that brief second when the microphone crackled right here where I am standing, when it crackled to life and a hush came over the crowd, because that was the moment when everyone was waiting to hear Nelson Mandela's very first words. And when he uttered the famous words, I stand before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. Everybody just applauded and got excited because many people were hearing his voice for the first time. 30 years since that day, we will forever remember those first words of this great man, this great symbol of resistance and of the inhumanity of the apartheid regime. This icon who in every sense is a legend. He had endured the unimaginable 27 years of incarceration, torn away from his family and his community, and shut away from the outside world and taken away from his organization. First on a forsaken island in the middle of the sea, and then behind the high walls of a prison compound. He had been taken to prison in chains while still a young man in his prime, and was now returning as a 72-year-old man whose health had been ravaged by the harshness of prison life. Given all he had gone through, it would have been understandable if he used his first speech right here at this point where I'm standing, as a free man, standing on these steps to denounce his captors, to gloat and to call for revenge. If anyone had the right to do so, it was Nelson Mandela. But he stood here and paid tribute to the people of South Africa, to the international community that had campaigned for his release, to the leaders of the liberation movement, in particular the African National Congress and fallen comrades. He repeated demands for the release of political prisoners, for the lifting of the state of emergency, and for the immediate end to violence so that negotiations could commence. He called on white compatriots to be part of shaping a new South Africa, saying uniting the people of the country was the foremost priority. President Nelson Mandela's words that day set the tone for a country that was in the throes of upheaval and uncertainty. It was a combination of strength and modesty. It was firm, but it was also reassuring. His words were delivered with the gravity and humility of a man whose life forever stands as a testimony to the victory of reconciliation over retribution, of the olive branch over the gun, and of coexistence over conflict. He spoke of many things, but above all of them, he said, the need to unite the people of South Africa is as important a task now as it has always been. In saying these words, he laid the cornerstone of what would become the edifice of a non-racial, united, and democratic South Africa, the central key objective of his organization, the African National Congress. These words were as true today as they were back then. They were words that brought hope to the downtrodden and the dispossessed. They brought courage to the despondent and even the cynical. They brought comfort to millions of our white compatriots who feared that this man, that this racist government had so demonized and maligned, would declare that they should be driven into the sea. It is easy for those with the benefit of hindsight to decry the choices and the decisions made by the founding fathers and mothers of this country during these turbulent times. And it is easy for those who decry what Madiba did to sit back and be critical of the leadership that he provided as he sought to mesh us into a nation. The winds of change were sweeping across the land. The African National Congress and other liberation movements had been unbanned, and their leadership were making their way home from exile. The government was bankrupt, and the economy was in free fall, rendering the state the liberation movement stood to inherit hollow and weakened. The right wing were mobilizing and marshalling their forces of intolerance to railroad the negotiation process. Many of the doomsday prophets said it would be impossible under these conditions to bring South Africa back from the brink. And yet, coming together as a nation, we did, under the leadership of Nelson Mandela, who had vision and foresight, who had the strength of the organization that he led. There is one singular reality of which we should never ever lose sight. It is that historic speech made by Madiba on these steps 30 years ago played a pivotal role in determining the future trajectory of this country. The speech right here, preceded by the walkout of Victor Verster, that was televised around the world, will forever adorn the chronicles of South Africa's liberation history. Following Madiba's release, negotiations that the ANC and Madiba had long called for got underway. These negotiations would culminate in our historic democratic elections, where Nelson Mandela became the first president of a new South Africa. That was the moment when we had a real president in this country. That was the moment when we felt we had our own president at last. Nearly everyone who set eyes on Madiba for the first time knew immediately that they were looking and seeing a president. He looked like a president, he spoke like a president, he walked like a president. Those who also saw him eating say that they could see that he was eating like a president. Even those who saw him asleep at times, they said he slept like a president. And some would even say he dreamt like a president. At last, South Africa had its own president in none other than Nelson Mandela. Now, with the greatest statesman and icon of resistance, Nelson Mandela affirming his commitment to reconciliation, to dialogue, to negotiation, to putting differences aside in pursuit of the greater good, it would indeed have been impossible for those of far lesser stature to resort to warmongering or to even talk of revenge. There are many lessons we can draw from the life of our nation's founding father. They will have been expounded upon earlier today to all of you young people in the dialogue that the Nelson Mandela Foundation organized. But the most enduring legacy President Mandela bequeathed this generation is the understanding that to achieve a bigger goal, sacrifices and compromises are necessary, be they personal or professional, and that the greater good must at all times triumph over self-interest and self-preservation. On that historic day 30 years ago, Utatu Nelson Mandela spoke of the struggle having reached a decisive moment. Uye wathi Utatu Madiba, wathi kudala silindile, kudala silindele le nkululeko, siyayifuna ngoku, asisafuni ukulinda nosuku olunye. Today now we are indeed at a decisive moment as well as a nation. We know that our country is facing many challenges. We too can no longer wait. The state of the economy, the high levels of unemployment, the social ills wreaking havoc in our communities, the shameful killing of women and girls, the stench of corruption and abuse of public funds have led to a trust deficit with our citizens. And this threatens to reverse our democratic gains. In 2 days from now, I will be delivering the State of the Nation address in Parliament to report back to the people of South Africa on what we have done and what we have not succeeded in doing over the past year. We will also talk frankly about how we should chart a new course for the year ahead. We can be proud of our achievements in entrenching the democracy that Nelson Mandela led us so ably to install, but yet there is much we can be less proud of. Millions of our people continue to live in poverty. Millions of our people, especially young people, are unemployed. The divide between the haves and the have-nots continues to widen. We must intensify our efforts to make good on the promise made by Madiba and his generation of leaders to bring a better life to our people, especially young people who have come out in their numbers today and who, despite our many challenges, see this country as a place of promise and opportunity. Madiba advocated the empowerment of young people and the empowerment of women in all respects. Their role in decision-making, not only in his party, the ANC, but in government, in society, and in business. Far away in Johannesburg, the flame of democracy burns outside the doors of the Constitutional Court. It was first lit on the 10th of December 2011 by President Mandela to mark the signing of the Constitution. It is a testament to our democracy and our Constitution. It was you, President Motlanthe, who said at the time, "This light symbolizes our inner strength. Let us pass it to future generations." To the youth of South Africa, I say to you today, it is in your honor that the eternal flame of democracy burns at Constitution Hill. It is you and the generations yet to come that we will do everything we can to live up to the example that was set by men and women like President Mandela, who put their countrymen and women before self. Let us, as the custodians of the memory of Madiba, continue to ensure that his name evokes unity of purpose, rejuvenates new patriotism amongst us. Let us be forever mindful that we are not a mere collection of communities that happen to share common space, but a nation that is guided by a vision. Let us all commit to creating an environment that fosters the unity of the people of South Africa. Let us contribute our skills, our knowledge, our expertise to improve the living condition of our people and dispense with the mentality that it is better to be at home, unemployed, than to go out there and try to be of service in our communities. Let us also promote a culture of learning, of teaching and service, and be more involved in the process of getting educated, but also getting our children educated as parents and not leave it only to our teachers. Let's strengthen our schooling and healthcare service and cease with the senseless and criminal act of vandalizing hospitals, clinics, schools, trains, in some misguided form of service delivery protests. Let us build clean and safe communities and protect the rights of women and children, and not think gender-based violence is somebody else's problem. Let us work together to root out crime and corruption in both the public and private sectors and strengthen the rule of law in our country. Let us not solicit or pay bribes or engage in corrupt acts as citizens and report criminality when we see it. Let us develop new industries to generate employment opportunities and not as business sit on our capital and fail to invest it back into the community. Let's restore credibility to our democratic state institutions and support them so that the public sees them as defenders and protectors of our constitutional order. And let us ensure that land reform process becomes a reality in our country and that the land is returned to the rightful owners of the land of South Africa. If we truly work together, we can grow South Africa and make it a better place. Let us, in Tata Madiba's words, seize this moment of such great symbolism to set our sights firmly on the path of renewing and healing this great nation, so that, in Tata Madiba's words, the process towards democracy is rapid and interrupted. And I say, as we remember Madiba on this day, 30 years after his release, let us all, each one of us, try to live in his image. Let us try to ensure that the vision that he had is fulfilled as all of us as South Africans work together to achieve the South Africa that we all want. A South Africa that is democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous, so that the prosperity can be shared amongst all of us as set out in the Freedom Charter. Let us celebrate today as we remember this man who's standing next to me and thank him for all the work that he did to bring us where we are. Thank you, Ngiyabulel.
I think we can do better than that. Can we give the President a huge round of applause? I think you'll agree with me that the President has both inspired us and make us to think, and about where we come from as a country and about where we want to go. Mr. President, I want to just touch on a couple of themes that you touched on so that we can then remind ourselves that the future needs to be brighter than today, and all of us owe it to these children who are sitting in front of us. That we need to touch the future with our hearts and our hands, you said, but that solidarity needs to be something that we continue to do. Human solidarity needs to continue to grow with us. That we must dedicate the remaining years, as Madiba said, of our lives to our people in terms of service that we need to give. I want to also say, Ntate Ramaphosa, that when I went to see Ntate Goldberg yesterday, he noted that one of the things that we keep failing in terms of our body politic is that this statement by Madiba, I dedicate the remaining years of my life to you, the people, that I want to serve, has been lost. And he noted that we have, as a result, left politics to politicians alone, and that we cannot trust politicians alone with politics, that politics belong to the people, and we must make sure that the people take their rightful place. So as one of our leading politicians, I know you agree with me. So here we had, on that day, Mama Winnie, as the President said, we had Ntate Walter Sisulu, Mama Albertina Sisulu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, whose foundation is represented here, Yahamed Leah Tutu, and Archbishop Tutu. And of course, Ntate Ramaphosa, who was holding the mic back then. But I want to end off by saying that if today is to do anything, is to continue to give us a sense of hope that tomorrow will be better. I want to close off by saying that in Madiba's letter, it's something that I like quoting a lot, where he said that he was writing to his children, saying that I know that you miss me a lot and you want to know when I'll come back home. I don't know when I will come back, but you'll remember that in a letter I wrote to you in '66, I noted that a white judge had said I should die in prison. I don't believe him, and I believe that I'll be out of prison, but that I live in hope, so don't worry about me now. So what it means is that we have to live in hope if Madiba didn't lose hope. So let me thank President Ramaphosa, Ntate Motlanthe, trustees of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, Presidency, City of Cape Town, Hans Seidel Foundation, Judy Sikuza, our MC, Video Vision for the videos, Tsuhosan for accommodation, Google Arts and Culture, Board of Trustees of the Foundation, the NMF staff, and everyone who has taken the time to be here. So I want to hand over again to Judy as she calls up our musicians.
As we finish,
Well, that was the end of the formal proceedings right here at the 30th anniversary celebrations here in central Cape Town, where Madiba made his first speech after his release from prison. Of course, going forward now, it's going to be a lot of artists who will be entertaining some of the crowds that have gathered here on the Grand Parade in front of the Cape Town City Hall. Of course, the president lamenting that he was the one person that was standing next to Madiba when he delivered that speech on the 11th of February in 1990, and also going as far as saying that he was the man who actually held the mic for him on that day. Of course, in the main, his speech is actually paying tribute to a lot of people who made that day a success. Of course, there were some hiccups where the convoy of Utatu Madiba got lost on the way, but eventually he made his way to here at the Cape Town City Hall. Of course, the president is facing a State of the Nation address in 2 days' time, and of course, I think he did lay a foundation on some of the issues that is likely to touch on. Of course, some of the challenges that he's saying that his government has to actually outroot is the issue of gender-based violence, poverty, unemployment, social ills, as well as fighting corruption. Of course, I'm going to be bringing in a lot of people who have been observing some of the issues at the speech here, and I'm joined now by the Chief Whip of the ANC in Parliament, Ms. Penny Mochojina. Briefly, ma'am, the President giving a presidential speech, of course, laying a foundation for what is expected at SONA 2020.
I think this was a very great event when we reconnect with the rebirth of our country. Indeed, Tata Mandela said a very profound words that we must be servants of the people. And all the speakers today, they were lashing on that, to be servants of the people, but also to change the country to be better. And it needs all of us through nation building and social cohesion. What the president has said just now, it is the same message he might be saying on Thursday, that of calling all South Africans to unite because the baton was passed on us. Let's take the baton and change South Africa for the better.
Talking about Thursday, there are threats of a disruption by the EFF. As the ANC, your reaction to that? Is there validity in the concerns that are raised by the party?
We cannot allow any anarchy to happen in Parliament. There are rules that are governing that House of Parliament, and therefore any disorderly behavior will be dealt with. Whoever comes with the mind of disrupting Parliament, he must not try it there. We are not going to be patient about that. They can take their battle somewhere else. Parliament must keep its decorum.
Lastly, Chief Whip, the ATM has brought a motion of no confidence in the president. On the other side, there seems to be internal divisions in the party in terms of whether does the president enjoy support and the backing of the ANC caucus when that motion is discussed.
There are no divisions in the ANC caucus. It's only that some people talk when not mandated, and that does not mean divisions. On that motion of no confidence, a two-party member cannot tell us anything. In fact, they are just trying to be relevant. They cannot be relevant by asking president to step down. It does not make sense. So they must just wait for their turn to come to Parliament only.
All right, thank you so much, ANC Chief Whip, Ms. Pemi Machodina, who's actually giving us a rundown of what the ANC stance is on comes the proceedings of the State of the Nation address on Thursday. And on that note, I'm going to cross to the other end where my colleague Asanda Mecha is standing by.
Well, Belelani, Madiba's love for children is known the world over. From the children that are gathered here, I have school kids from Lozi Primary at Guguletu right here in Cape Town. And I want to have a bit of a chat with them. From what the president said about Utatu Mandela, what do you remember? Who turned president?
President Nelson Mandela, he died on 1984, she won on 1984 in Mvezo.
What else do you remember about what the president said?
I remember he said 6 children and 3 children dying. Now she has 3 children.
President Ramaphosa also said you should not destroy schools, you should not destroy clinics when you are fighting because there's service delivery issues. Will you now make sure that nobody destroys anything that's going on?
Yes, we are going to monitor everything happening in the school so that there is no crime.
Okay, the kids are very excited. I'm going to try and gather them and get them calmed down a bit. In the meantime, let's go back to Belelani.
All right, thank you so much, Asanda. Of course, we are competing with this entertainment and artists that are dazzling some of the crowds that are here in front of the Cape Town City Hall. Of course, the president is making a lot of emphasis around the issues of ethical leadership. Professor Thuli Madonsela now joins me on this conversation. Remember, the president again emphasizing the importance of ethical leadership in preserving our democracy. What message would you say to him when it comes to State of the Nation address?
Sorry, I missed that.
I do understand there's a lot of this. On ethical leadership, the president making an emphasis that it's very important to strengthen our democracy. Your thoughts on that?
I'm hearing the president saying that we all need to play our part in taking over from where President Nelson Mandela left us, and that Mandela and his cohort achieved a roadmap, which is the Constitution and basic freedom, but now we all have to patiently play our part to make sure that everyone begins to see land, everyone begins to see the fruits of the economy, education and everything.
Talking about current developments at the moment, are you observing the court battles that the current public protector is engaged in, as well as the parliamentary process that is actually proposed there for her removal?
I am aware, but as you know, as her predecessor, my view would be to simply say justice must prevail. I do have sympathy for the office. I do have sympathy for government. At the end of the day, justice must prevail to make sure that democracy is strengthened, whatever that means.
All right, former public protector, Professor Thuli Madonsela, giving us her views on what the president delivered just a short while ago. From now, we are going to cross back to studio. From myself, Bulelani Philip, and my colleague Asanda Mbecha, thank you for joining us. We'll go back to Johannesburg.
Bulelani and Asanda, thanks very much indeed for the coverage there from Cape Town, of course, today. This was the scene of the anniversary celebrations, commemorations of that historic day 30 years ago when Nelson Mandela took his first steps after 27 years in incarceration. And the day was pretty much reenacting everything that happened this day 30 years ago, beginning at Victor Verster prison, which has now changed its name, and taking people to Cape Town city centre, where Nelson Mandela eventually managed to make his first ever speech after spending those 27 years in prison. So it was a day that really was about speaking to the future generations. Most of the people that were there, young people, children, school children, listening to the speeches that were delivered by, amongst others, people like the Cape Town Mayor, Dan Plato, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, delivering an address there. And eventually the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, then delivered his keynote, and he began by remembering the time when he was at that very same place, and he was standing next to a statue, but of course 30 years ago he was standing next to the man himself with a microphone in hand as Nelson Mandela delivered his first ever speech after 27 years in prison. And he took us back to that moment and what that moment meant, and the importance of the speech in giving hope to the people and setting the tone for what was still to come. You will remember that democracy hadn't arrived, and at that time was a very difficult time in the country, and that Mandela and other people's leadership were key to getting South Africa across the line. He said that his speech set the tone for the work that needed to be done. His words were inspiring, comforting, and brought much hope. And he says that he had a few words for Mandela critics who say that perhaps some of the choices that he made, but he said that the winds of change were sweeping across the land, and it was all about the greater good. And that even at that moment, one could get a sense of the kind of South Africa that was needing to be built. And Mandela was talking about unity and bringing people together. And the president went on to say that at that time there were many challenges, but that even now a decisive moment has been reached in South Africa. And he talked about the State of the Nation address, which will be coming later this week, where he said that there will be some honest conversation about the things that need to be done, and the work that needs to be done to deal with the issues of poverty, inequality, and making sure that nobody get left behind. He says that we need to work hard to preserve the legacy of leaders like Mandela, talking about making sure his name continues to evoke unity and patriotism, and commit to creating an environment that fosters unity. He talked to us and said, you know, we need to move away from things like vandalism and making sure that we work to protect our women and children against gender-based violence, and making sure that it isn't somebody else's problem. Not to do crime, and that businesses should develop new industries, and make sure that land is returned to its rightful owners. And he says, much like Mandela did back 30 years ago, that if we work together, we can create a better South Africa, and the South Africa that we desire. So that was the president speaking to the people that were gathered there as the 30th anniversary commemorations have been playing out today in Cape Town. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but before that, what we thought we'd do is we asked a number of South Africans to share their thoughts about some of them what they remember at that time, and others what they think about this anniversary 30 years on Nelson Mandela's release.
This is Ndileka Mandela. The day my grandfather was released on February 11th, 1990, I was walking on air with joy.
My name is Tembeka Tobi. I am a human rights advocate in Johannesburg. Although I knew about apartheid, most of what I knew then came from my mother and my aunt. I knew that apartheid meant that black people didn't count for much. Mandela's release suggested to me then that perhaps as black people we would also count as human beings.
Hi, my name is Yvonne Chaka Chaka. The 11th of February brings so many good memories. I was in hospital, I remember vividly. My son was just born a day before that, but I think everybody was just glued on that TV screen. We all wanted to see this man called Utato Nelson Mandela. Everybody was just crying. It was such a nostalgic moment. We all wanted to see his face because we had never seen him. This man had been incarcerated for 27 years, but what was good was when we all saw him walking down hand in hand with Mama Winnie Mandela. That was the moment. But I'm sure other people today are asking themselves, is this South Africa for all of us? It is not yet Uhuru for others.